There was a girl who lived where the sea met the sky. Her name was Nessa, and her house was the last one on the cliffs, facing the endless ocean. She didn't talk much, she didn't dream much, and most of all, she didn't wish. Not anymore. The people of the village called her odd, a girl with sea glass eyes and a mind always somewhere else. She wore a cloak stitched with faded stars and spent her days collecting driftwood, mending nets, or walking the shore in silence. The children whispered stories about her in the market, saying she was cursed by the tide, that her voice had been stolen by a storm. But the truth was simpler. Nessa had once wished, desperately, fiercely. She had once whispered her dreams into bottles and thrown them into the waves, believing that the sea would carry them somewhere, to someone who could answer them. But the sea had never answered. Not when she wished for her parents to return from their last voyage. Not when she begged the stars to send her a sign. Not when she cried her heart into the water, night after night. So one day, Nessa stopped wishing. She packed away the old bottles. She burned her letters to the wind. She closed the door to the attic, where her father's maps and her mother's journal lay untouched. And she told herself that silence was easier than hoping. The sea remained. The tide came and went. And the lighthouse at the edge of the horizon still flickered, barely visible on clear nights, as if waiting for a sailor who'd forgotten the way home. Most villagers didn't believe the lighthouse was real. Just a trick of the clouds, they'd say, squinting at the misty line where sea met sky. There's nothing out there but salt and storm. But Nessa saw it. She always had. From the cliffs behind her cottage, on nights when she couldn't sleep, she'd stare out at the horizon and see that single light blinking far, far away. Faint, steady, lonely. She never told anyone, until the morning after the storm. A wind had blown through the village, loud and strange. The sea had roared louder than usual, and the moon had hidden behind layers of cloud. And when Nessa went to the shore to check the nets, she found a bottle waiting for her in the tide. But not just any bottle. This one glowed faintly with silver light, as though it remembered stars. Its glass was smooth, but warm to the touch. Inside it was a single slip of paper, weathered, curled, and sealed with a tiny shell clasp. Nessa looked around. The beach was empty. No footprints. No signs of passing boats. With a careful hand, she opened the bottle. Inside, in ink the color of midnight, was a message. Greater than to the one who stopped wishing. The light is fading, and only a wish can find the way. The lighthouse of the last horizon. Nessa stared at the note, heart hammering in her chest. She read it again, and again. It didn't make sense. She had stopped wishing. She had stopped long ago. And yet, the bottle in her hands pulsed with warmth, like it knew her. Like it had been searching. Like it had waited across many tides to reach this moment. For the first time in a long time, Nessa whispered out loud. Is it real? The wind stirred in answer. And far across the sea, barely visible in the light of day, the flicker of the lighthouse blinked once, twice. Then disappeared into mist. Nessa carried the bottle home with trembling hands. She didn't stop at the shore. Didn't pause by the gull-marked rocks or the tide pools where she usually lingered. Something inside her, something quiet and long buried, had stirred awake the moment she touched that glowing glass. She reached her cottage at the cliff's edge, the wind tugging gently at her star-stitched cloak. Inside, the fire had burned low. Her tea had gone cold. But she didn't notice. She set the bottle on the table, sat down, and unrolled the message again. Greater than to the one who stopped wishing. The light is fading, and only a wish can find the way. The lighthouse of the last horizon. Her fingers traced the words. The handwriting was old, elegant, inked with care. Each stroke shimmered faintly, as though written under moonlight. She turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. No map. No name. Just a calling, she murmured. She glanced to the window. The sky beyond was turning pale blue, dawn brushing the sea with soft light. But where the lighthouse had flickered, just for a breath, it was gone again. She turned to the shelf by the hearth. On it sat a dusty glass jar, filled with smooth pebbles. Once, she had thrown wishes into the sea with every stone. One for each longing, one for each unanswered hope. Most were gone now, only 3 pebbles remained. She opened the jar, took one in her palm, and stared at it. "I don't wish any more," she said, almost convincing herself. And yet, the glow of the bottle danced across the room, painting her walls with soft silver. She looked again at the note. Greater than only a wish can find the way. It wasn't a command. It was a choice. She closed her fingers around the stone. Then, very quietly, she walked back outside. The wind had grown still. The tide had pulled far out. The beach stretched long and empty. She walked barefoot to the water's edge, feeling the cold sand sink beneath her toes. And for the first time in years, Nessa whispered a wish. "I wish to find the light." She tossed the pebble into the tide. There was no thunder, no bolt from the sky. But the bottle behind her began to glow brighter. She turned to see the message inside shifting, the words rearranging. She gasped and stepped closer. Now it read, "Greater than the path opens. Look to the mirror shell at first light. The tide will guide you to the sail that remembers." Below the new message, a strange shape had appeared, a symbol like a compass made of waves and stars, inked in silver. Nessa didn't understand, but her heart beat faster. Her skin prickled. The bottle pulsed again and dimmed, as though it had given all it could for now. She didn't sleep that night. She packed a satchel instead, filling it with old things she had long left untouched. Her mother's journal, her father's pocket compass, a lantern, a tiny loaf of sea bread and a flask of lemon water. The cloak with the faded stars. And at dawn, as the first light touched the sea, Nessa returned to the shore. There it was, half buried in the sand. A mirror shell, large as a dinner plate, reflecting the rising sun in its pearled surface. She picked it up, and as she tilted it, the reflection in the shell shimmered, not showing her face, but something else. A boat, half covered in sand, curled in seaweed, its sails torn but still intact. A figurehead of a lighthouse carved into its bow. She dropped the shell in shock and spun around. It was real. There, hidden behind a tangle of driftwood, was the boat from the reflection. Her father's old skiff, lost in a storm long ago. But now, it had returned, aged, changed, but waiting. The tide lapped gently at its hull. Nessa stepped toward it, heart pounding. She ran a hand over its side. Salt and time had worn it, but it stood firm. And etched, just beneath the helm, newly carved by sea or spirit, were 5 simple words. Greater than to the one who dares return. The sail groaned as it caught the wind. Nessa stood at the helm of the skiff, her father's old boat, reborn from the tide, watching the coastline fade into mist. The village was already gone behind her, swallowed by silver fog. Only the sea stretched ahead now, vast, quiet, and trembling with memory. She had brought the bottle with her. It now sat beside the compass, gently glowing. The note inside had faded into blankness again, as though waiting. The skiff glided over glassy waves, moving without oar or rudder. The water beneath it shimmered faintly with hues of blue, lavender, and green. At first, Nessa thought it was sunlight, but then she saw them. Shapes beneath the surface. Images swirled in the depths like reflections on memory. A girl casting pebbles into the tide, her mother's laughter echoing across the rocks, the moment she opened the bottle for the first time. "The sea remembers," Nessa whispered. It wasn't just water. It was memory made tide. The wind shifted, and the air grew sweet, tinged with salt and lilac. The sea whispered softly, like a lullaby spoken in forgotten voices. She looked over the edge of the boat, and what she saw made her breath catch. A second sky beneath the water. Clouds of ink and glimmering threads drifted under the surface like constellations, and scattered across the sea floor were dozens, no, hundreds, of bottles. Each one pulsed faintly. Some glowed gold, others, dull blue. All of them were wishes. And one of them was hers. The pebble she'd cast the night before floated up from the deep, encased in a shell of starlight. As it neared the skiff, the bottle beside her pulsed again, and a single line of glowing script appeared on the inside of the glass. "Greater than do you see now." Every wish was heard, but not every heart was ready to listen. Nessa's hand trembled. She had thought her words vanished. She had believed the tide had ignored her. But the truth was stranger, softer, deeper. The sea had held her wishes. Kept them safe. waiting for the moment she would return. Suddenly, the wind dropped. The boat slowed. A shape rose from the mist ahead. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then, like a tower. Then Nessa realized it was an island, small, quiet, and circular, with white sands that shimmered like pearl. The skiff drifted gently onto the shore. Nessa stepped off, feet sinking into the warm sand. The moment she did, the sea behind her fell still. Completely still. This place was not on any map. It was not land as the world knew it. It was a place shaped by longing, sealed by memory. At the island's center stood a ring of stones, smooth and upright. In their middle, nestled like a heart in a shell, stood a tree made of driftwood and glass. Its branches were tangled with ribbons and shells, bells and tiny bottles. Some were empty, some shimmered with light. Nessa approached slowly, feeling a strange tug in her chest. One bottle swung gently from the lowest branch. She reached for it, and paused. It had her name carved into it. Greater than Nessa. She opened it. Inside was a piece of paper, weathered but familiar. And as she unfolded it, her breath hitched. Greater than I wish I could be brave again. I wish I could believe again. I miss them so much. She remembered writing it. She had been 8 years old. Her voice had cracked. Her hands had shaken. It had been the last wish she ever made before she gave up. And now it had returned to her, still whole. A wind stirred through the glass tree. The bottles clinked gently like chimes. And the message in the bottle she had brought with her flickered once more. Greater than the tide remembers. The sea forgives. If you are ready, the way will open. Nessa closed her eyes. She pressed the old wish to her heart. I'm ready, she whispered. I want to follow the light. The wind shifted. The tide surged. And behind her, the sea parted like curtains drawn back on a stage, revealing a path of stars glowing beneath the waves, stretching forward into the mist. And far at the end of it, blinking once like a slow heartbeat, was the light from the lighthouse of the last horizon. The path across the sea shimmered like stardust woven into the tide. Nessa stood at the edge of the small island, her heart thudding with quiet wonder. The starlit path led forward, impossibly forward, across the ocean's skin, glowing with memory and promise. She climbed back into the skiff, the glass bottle nestled close at her side, and let the tide guide her. With every mile, the world grew quieter. The waves no longer broke. The air grew soft. Even the wind seemed to hush itself in reverence. It was as if she had left behind not just land, but time. Then, through the golden mist ahead, another island began to rise from the horizon. It was larger than the one before, cloaked in hanging vines and crooked trees, and surrounded by a thin ring of fog. Strange stones jutted from the beach like the spines of ancient sea creatures, and the sand sparkled faintly underfoot. But what caught Nessa's breath was what lay between the trees. Hundreds of markers, weathered plaques, stones wrapped in cloth and etched with letters. And every one bore a name. She stepped carefully into the grove. The deeper she walked, the quieter the air became. And then she noticed something strange. Some of the names she passed were faded, almost entirely erased by time. Others were crystal clear, as if carved just moments ago. She paused by one of the stones and read it aloud. Greater than Kai. He once wished to find his voice again. She turned to the next. Greater than Aurelia. She dreamed of skies beyond fear. The farther she went, the more names she saw. Some were written in languages she couldn't read. Some were tiny, marked by shells and feathers. One was nothing but a smooth stone with a single teardrop drawn in charcoal. And then, she stopped. Her breath caught. There, near the center of the grove, was a tall stone wrapped in seaweed and silk. It shimmered faintly with a bluish hue. On it was carved a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Greater than Nessa. She wished, but forgot how to believe it. Nessa fell to her knees. She reached out and brushed her hand across the stone. It was cold to the touch, and somehow, familiar. As if this name, this version of her, had been resting here all this time. Waiting for her to return. A soft breeze stirred the vines around her. From somewhere deep within the grove, a sound began to rise, like humming. She turned. A figure was walking between the stones. At first, they looked like light given shape, a robe being woven from whispers, half seen and half remembered. Their face was hidden beneath a driftwood mask, carved with hundreds of tiny names, and their voice, when they spoke, sounded like wind through reeds. "You've found your name," the figure said. "And remembered it." Nessa swallowed. "I forgot it." "You forgot its weight," they replied. "What it meant. Who it belonged to. You gave it away the day you stopped wishing." Nessa looked down at the stone again. Her old self. Her forgotten hope. "Why is it here?" "Because names are more than sounds," the figure said. "They are the story you choose to carry. And every story that's left behind comes here, to wait." They gestured around the grove. "This is the island of forgotten names. Each of these markers holds a version of someone who once believed in something, until the world told them they were too small, too strange, too late." "But, if the names are forgotten," Nessa hesitated, "does that mean they're lost forever?" The figure knelt beside her. "No, they wait. Until someone is brave enough to remember them." She looked at the stone again. "I remember now," she whispered. "I remember who I was. I remember why I wished." The figure reached into their robes and drew out a lantern, small, silver, and flickering with soft gold light. "Then it is time to carry your name again," they said. "But not as it was. As it is now. A name is not just a beginning. It is a compass." Nessa took the lantern and held it to her heart. The stone at her feet shimmered, and slowly, gently, dissolved into wind. The humming in the grove grew louder, no longer haunting, but beautiful. As if every forgotten name were singing to her in thanks. And from deep within the island, a beam of light broke through the fog. The lighthouse had moved closer. The path was opening again. And Nessa knew now that her name, her story, was not something she had lost. It was something she had grown into. The path of stars reappeared as the island faded behind her. Nessa stood at the bow of the skiff, the silver lantern from the island of forgotten names now tied around her neck, casting a soft, warm glow. The glass bottle rested in her satchel beside her mother's old journal and her father's compass, though the compass had refused to move since the voyage began. No matter how many times she tapped it, turned it, or held it up to the sky, the needle remained still. Frozen, just like her memory had once been. Now, as she drifted farther into the sea of impossible stars, a fog rolled in, thicker than before. It folded around her like a dream forgotten mid-sentence. Even the light from the silver lantern seemed to dim. Then, thunk, the skiff struck something. Nessa leapt to her feet. Ahead of her, barely visible in the haze, stood a tower of driftwood and bone, half sunken and wrapped in fog vines. Hanging from it were hundreds of rusted compasses, dangling like wind chimes from tangled branches, clinking gently in the breathless air. The compass grave. She steered closer. A staircase spiraled up the structure, narrow and dripping. At its peak was a single doorway, flickering with pale blue light. Nessa climbed slowly, the lantern at her chest pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside, the room was round, and the walls were covered in maps with no labels, no legends, no landmarks. Just looping lines, spirals, and dotted trails that all eventually circled back on themselves. Like mazes, like wishes with no endings. And sitting in the center of it all was an old man. He wore a cloak stitched from torn sails and a crown made of rusted compass needles. His beard spilled across the floor like fog. His eyes, however, were sharp and sea-colored. He looked up as she entered. "So," he rasped, "you've brought a compass that doesn't point." Nessa nodded. "Yes, my father's. It stopped moving when I was small." He reached for it. She hesitated, but handed it over. He held it carefully, studying it with a kind of reverence. "Compasses are strange," he said softly. "Most people think they're made to find the way forward. But the best ones," he looked at her, "they find the truth instead." He turned the compass once in his hand, and something clicked. Suddenly, the needle spun, wildly at first, and then stopped. But it didn't point north. It pointed inward, toward Nessa's heart. She gasped. The old man smiled. "It doesn't lead to places. It leads to decisions. To truths too often buried." He handed it back to her. "Your father didn't lose his way," he said quietly. "He found something deeper. That compass knew it. It stopped moving because you weren't ready to see where it truly pointed. The lantern around her neck pulsed brighter, as if in agreement. And now, she asked. Now, the man said, rising slowly, you'll need to choose. He led her to the far wall, where a single map hung, tattered, delicate, and glowing faintly with silver ink. It showed a storm, not a place, not a land, just a swirling, endless storm in the center of the sea. Around it were scribbled notes. Voices whisper here. Wishes shatter here. Many do not return. This, said the old man, is the storm of echoes. The only way to the lighthouse of the last horizon. Nessa swallowed. And the only way through is with this compass. He nodded. The compass will not show you how to escape the storm. It will show you who you are inside it. He looked at her gently. Every sailor who nears the lighthouse must pass through the storm. Because the lighthouse does not guide ships, it guides the lost parts of the soul. She took the compass from his hand. It was warm now. The needle had stilled again, pointing inward. Back to her. The old man placed a map in her hands. Not of the sea, not of islands, but of memories. Each line marked a decision she had once made. A hope she had once abandoned. A dream she had hidden from. Take it, he said. The storm will try to take everything from you. This will help you remember what is truly yours. Nessa stepped back out into the fog. The skiff was waiting, steady as ever. As she stepped aboard, the fog parted ahead, just slightly, and in the far distance, the storm began to rise. It was not just clouds. It was voice and wind and sorrow. It howled with forgotten promises and echoed with fears long buried. And in the middle of it, blinking through the clouds like a steady heart, was the lighthouse. Waiting. The sky turned dark before the clouds arrived. Nessa stood at the helm of her small skiff, gripping the edge tightly. The sea ahead twisted like ink dropped into water, shadows swirling beneath the surface. The storm was no longer a rumor or a map's warning. It was real, and it was waiting for her. The storm of echoes didn't roar like ordinary storms. It spoke. As her boat crossed the final glowing ripple of the star path, the mist thickened into clouds, and voices began to stir in the air. Greater than you should have stayed home, little girl. The sea doesn't care about wishes. They never came back. What makes you think you will? Nessa closed her eyes. I am not that girl anymore, she whispered, holding the glowing compass to her chest. It pulsed, warm and steady. The storm surged. Winds whipped around her, salt stinging her cheeks. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in shimmering flecks of memory. Each one that touched her brought a sudden flash. Her mother's arms around her, singing under the stars. Her father's laughter, steering the skiff toward the horizon. The night they didn't come home. Nessa gasped, clutching the mast as the skiff rocked violently. More voices poured in from the mist, some soft and sad, others sharp and cruel. Greater than they left you. You were never enough. Your wish didn't matter. Tears sprang to her eyes. For a moment, she faltered. But then, the lantern at her side flared brightly. It pushed back the storm just enough for her to see a shape in the swirling mist, a small raft, broken and bobbing. Inside it sat a child, no older than 6, curled up and crying. The child looked up, and Nessa saw herself. The child whispered, I just wanted them to come back. I thought if I wished hard enough. Nessa's heart clenched. She knelt in the skiff, reaching across the dark waters. It wasn't your fault, she said softly. You were brave to hope. You were brave to wish. The child blinked, her tears stopping. The storm howled, but its edge softened. Greater than they left you. No, Nessa said aloud, rising to her feet. They were taken by the sea, not by choice. And they never stopped loving me. The voices began to lose their shape. She held out the compass again. The needle, once pointing inward, now turned toward the center of the storm, bright and steady. She followed it. Lightning danced in the clouds above, but it did not strike her. Waves rose high, but the boat did not break. The storm still screamed, but its voice no longer shook her. Because Nessa had remembered who she was. Not a girl lost to sorrow. A sailor of memory. A seeker of light. A keeper of her own name. The bottle at her side pulsed once more, and a new message appeared inside. Greater than you have faced the voices. You have braved the storm. One light remains. Follow it home. Then, the sea calmed. The clouds thinned. And through the last breath of mist, the sky broke open. There it was, rising from a circle of rock and tide, surrounded by glowing reefs and a sky stitched with stars. The lighthouse of the last horizon. Its light no longer blinked. It shone in a steady beam, reaching out across sea and storm and time. And in that moment, Nessa understood. The lighthouse had never been calling her forward. It had been waiting for her to return. The light guided her in. It was not a blinding beacon but a steady warmth, like a hand outstretched through the dark. As Nessa's skiff glided over the glowing reef, the sea turned clear and still, so clear she could see all the way to the ocean floor. And what she saw below stole her breath. A city, crumbled and overgrown with coral, nestled beneath the lighthouse's rocky base. Towers leaned like sunken teeth, streets paved in shells and sea glass shimmered like ghostly ribbons. Strange, barnacle-covered statues stood where fountains might have been, and in the center of it all, an ancient spiral staircase wound down into the earth, vanishing into the deep. The light of the lighthouse pulsed softly above, but Nessa knew. The answers were below. She dropped anchor by a flat coral ledge and slung the silver lantern over her shoulder. With a deep breath and a whispered word to the sea, she stepped into the water. Instead of pulling her down, the water wrapped around her like silk. She could breathe. The lantern stayed lit. Her cloak billowed behind her like seaweed caught in a gentle tide. She descended, past old statues of sailors, past mosaics showing stars falling into bottles, past vines of glowing kelp that whispered her name. At the base of the spiral stair waited a door. Carved from pearl and moonstone, it shimmered with runes that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. As she stepped closer, the bottle in her satchel vibrated gently. And then the door opened, not with force, but with recognition. Inside was a chamber the size of a cathedral, hollowed from stone and lined with murals. Scenes of people casting wishes into the sea. Of ships caught in storms. Of a glowing lighthouse rising like hope from the waves. And in the center stood a figure cloaked in ocean colors, long and rippling, like woven tide and sky. Their face was hidden behind a smooth mask of silver. Where their hearts should have been, a faint light pulsed, like a living lantern. They turned as Nessa entered. "You came," they said, their voice both old and young, thunder and rain. "I followed the light," Nessa replied. "You brought more than that," the keeper said. "You brought your name, your memory, your storm. You brought what most leave behind." "Who are you?" she asked softly. "I am the keeper beneath the sea," they replied. "I guard the forgotten, the unfinished, the unfound." They turned slowly, gesturing to the glowing murals. "Every wish cast into the tide reaches here. Some are caught in storms. Some are never spoken aloud. But all are kept. None are ever truly lost." Nessa stepped closer. "Even mine." The keeper nodded. "Especially yours." They reached into the air, and a swirl of light formed between their hands. A glowing thread spun from starlight and ink. "This is your wish. The one you made as a child. The one you buried." Nessa's eyes widened. The thread shimmered with memory, her voice, young and breaking. "Greater than I wish they'd come back. I wish someone would listen. I wish I could believe again." The keeper handed it to her. "You cannot change the past," they said gently. "But you can carry it forward." As she held the thread, it wrapped around her wrist, warm, alive. And suddenly, her father's voice echoed in her memory, not as sorrow, but as strength. "Greater than, a good sailor doesn't just follow stars. She learns to make her own light." Nessa looked up. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm ready," she whispered. The keeper stepped aside, revealing a staircase rising from the back of the chamber, a narrow passage carved in saltstone, leading up. "To reach the light," they said, "you must pass through the final memory. One more truth. The one you've carried in silence the longest." Nessa looked to the stairs. She clenched the glowing compass in one hand, the lantern in the other. And she began to climb. Nessa climbed slowly. The staircase spiraled through the heart of the island, carved from saltstone and glowing faintly with threads of silver. The lantern at her side flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat. The compass in her palm buzzed gently, the needle still pointing not north, but inward. As she rose higher, the air changed. It grew heavier, not with danger, but with memory. Not like the ones she'd already faced. This one was different. It wasn't a memory she had ever spoken aloud. At the top of the stair, she reached a circular chamber just beneath the lighthouse lantern. It was quiet, soft, a place shaped by silence more than stone. The walls were lined with mirrors, not of glass, but of still water, held upright in shimmering frames. Each one rippled gently, showing not what was, but what might have been. She stepped toward the first mirror. It showed her at age 10, climbing aboard a great ship with her parents, laughing in the sun. She moved to the next. Here, she never stopped wishing, never gave up, and a small glowing bottle floated up to a lighthouse door, where someone opened it, smiling. Another mirror. She stood in the marketplace, surrounded by friends, telling stories of her family's adventures, her voice proud and clear. The reflections tore at her. "These aren't real," she whispered. "No," a voice said behind her. "But they are real enough to hurt." Nessa turned. There stood a girl, no older than she had been the day she gave up hope. Her eyes were sea glass blue. Her cloak was whole and bright. She looked, untouched by grief. "I'm who you might have been," the girl said. "If you had kept believing. If you'd never stopped wishing." Nessa's throat tightened. "You're the wish I never made." The girl nodded. "You wished for your parents to return. You wished to be brave. But you never made this wish." She stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Nessa's heart. "You never wished to forgive yourself." Nessa froze. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought it was my fault." The chamber darkened as the echoes returned, old and sharp. "Greater than if you had said something. If you had told them not to go. If you had been stronger." The girl, the other Nessa, shook her head. "You were just a child. You carried too much. You thought it made you strong to hold it alone. But even now, part of you still believes you deserve to lose them." The lantern dimmed, the compass spun, and Nessa dropped to her knees. "I was afraid that if I forgave myself," she whispered, "then it meant I had to let them go." The other Nessa knelt beside her. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting," she said gently. "It means remembering without pain. It means loving them in the light, not only in the shadows." The final mirror lit up. In it, Nessa stood older, stronger, beside a glowing lighthouse, lantern in one hand, compass in the other, welcoming other travelers home. A keeper of light, a guide, a girl who had wished again, and meant it. Nessa looked back at the younger version of herself. "I do wish," she said, voice steady. "I wish to forgive myself. I wish to let go of guilt. And I wish to carry their love with me, not as weight, but as light." The chamber trembled. The mirrors rippled, then stilled, reflecting only truth now. The girl smiled, and faded into stars. The compass in Nessa's hand glowed brilliantly. The lantern flared, and high above, the final door opened. A stair led to the top of the lighthouse, where the true light waited. Her heart full, her hands steady, Nessa stepped into the final ascent. Nessa climbed the final stair. Above her, a soft radiance spilled down the spiral like a golden tide, neither blinding nor cold, but warm and alive, like the sun rising after the longest storm. At last, she emerged into the topmost chamber of the lighthouse. It was nothing like she expected. There were no gears, no lanterns swinging on chains, no mirrors casting beams across the sea. Instead, the light came from a single orb, suspended in midair. It shimmered with the color of every wish ever spoken, the blue of longing, the gold of love, the silver of memory, the violet of dreams. The moment Nessa stepped into the room, the orb pulsed gently. And then, it spoke. "Greater than you came home." Nessa froze. "Home. Greater than you carried every broken piece of yourself here," the light said, its voice neither male nor female, but something in between, like wind speaking to water. "And in doing so, you brought back what was lost." Nessa stepped forward slowly, the compass glowing in her hand, the lantern swinging at her side. "I thought this place was just legend. A story my parents told. Greater than most legends are born from truth. And many truths wait a long time to be believed again." She looked around. The room was ringed with empty shelves, hollow nooks, and suspended pedestals, each one seemingly waiting for something. And in the center, beneath the orb, stood a single pedestal. It held a book. Old, leather-bound, the edges worn. Her mother's handwriting curled across its cover. Greater than the Book of Returning. Nessa picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside were blank pages. Dozens. Hundreds. Then, as she turned to the center, words appeared. Her story. Every chapter. Every wish. Every moment of sorrow and courage and silence and light. It was all there. Written by no hand, but remembered by the world itself. She stared, breath caught in her throat. I never knew it was being written. Greater than because it could only be written by the one who lived it, the light said gently. You are not just the seeker of the lighthouse. You are its keeper now. The wind shifted outside the window. Far below, she could see the sea, calm and shimmering. Islands lit with soft starlight. The storm had passed. The path had cleared. And rising from the waters, other lights began to glow. Lanterns. Bottles. Small, trembling stars. Greater than others are still wishing, the light said. Others are still waiting to be found. Nessa understood now. The lighthouse did not exist to save ships from rocks. It existed to help hearts find their way back to themselves. She looked down at the bottle she had carried since the tide first delivered it to her feet. It now glowed with a golden pulse, no longer a call, but an answer. She stepped to the center of the chamber, lifted the bottle high, and placed it upon the pedestal. The orb flared once, brilliant and full, and sent a beam of soft light into the sky, soaring through clouds and stars, reaching all the corners of the sea. And with it, went her wish. Greater than may others find the way. May the light never fade. May no one feel alone in the dark again. The light from the lighthouse blazed skyward like a beacon reborn. Nessa stood at the tower's highest edge, the wind gently tugging at her cloak, the sea glimmering far below. The compass in her hand no longer buzzed, it simply rested, its needle quiet and still, no longer needing to point. Because now, she knew the way. And more than that, she knew why she had come. She had faced the storm, the silence, the shadows of her own heart. She had followed a path lit not by certainty, but by courage. And now, the lighthouse of the last horizon had chosen her. She was its keeper. Yet the journey was not over. Down the winding steps of the lighthouse, through the chamber where the Book of Returning waited, Nessa found her skiff moored at the base once more. The sea had grown still and golden, as if honoring her return. But she wasn't sailing home in the same way she had left it. She had become part of something greater. In the days that followed, Nessa returned to the village on the cliffs. To those who had watched her walk the shore in silence for years, she was changed, but they could not say how. She smiled more. She spoke softly, but with certainty. Her eyes held stars. Children gathered at her porch to hear stories they didn't know were true. Stories of a city beneath the sea. Of a compass that pointed inward. Of a bottle that answered when no one else did. Of a storm that spoke with old sorrow and a girl who learned to speak back. And late at night, Nessa would climb the cliffs behind her cottage. There, she lit a silver lantern. Not for herself, but for those still searching. And beyond the edge of the horizon, the lighthouse answered. Its light now pulsed brighter, reaching those across vast oceans of silence. It found those who were lost in grief. Those who had given up believing. Those who held wishes in their hands and thought they were forgotten. And slowly, like flowers blooming in salt and starlight, others began to arrive. Some with broken ships. Some with stories half told. Some with names they were only just beginning to remember. Nessa welcomed them all. She helped mend sails. She taught how to listen to the compass of one's own heart. She showed them the way back to the storm, not to run from it, but to walk through it and come out whole. Because she knew now, the light was not just a place. It was a promise. And it was never hers alone. It belonged to every soul brave enough to seek it. And on certain nights, when the mist was thin and the tide whispered kindly, you could still see Nessa's lantern glowing on the cliffs. A single light, steady, waiting, guiding the next wish safely home. The end. Glowing star moral of the story. Healing comes not from forgetting, but from remembering with courage. No wish is ever truly lost. No heart too broken to be whole again. When we dare to follow our own light, we help others find theirs too. For more motivation stories, please like, share and subscribe this channel. Thanks and God bless.